All right, good evening. Welcome to this March 7th, 2024 Sammamish Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Let's start out with roll call. We switched a couple people around here, so I hope I don't get too confused. Say it's Fabian.
Here.
Hisham Alkawad.
Here.
Sudrani Sankara.
Here.
Mike Bresco.
Here.
I'm Mark Bachman, and I'm here. John Bachman.
Here.
Ajay Chakrapani.
Here.
See, I only switched you guys. That's not too bad. Okay, let's do approval of the agenda. Any comments about this evening's exciting agenda? No comments. Let's call the agenda approved by common consent. Approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, February 15th. Any comments or corrections on the meeting minutes? No comments or corrections on the February 15th meeting minutes, so we'll call those approved by common consent. Next, we will do non-agenda public comment. So on the agenda tonight, we have a presentation of a preliminary version of the comp plan update, and we're also going to introduce the discussion about the transportation master plan. So any public comments about other things, now's the time. 3 minutes per person. Anybody want to comment? Anybody online on the meeting?
We have one hand raised online, Mr. Stigney. I'll go ahead and promote you.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. It's Paul Stickney, Sammamish, fellow staff, city, and consultants. Tonight, I'm going to go a tiny bit off script and cover a few things that have sent in recently and want to make a point about needs in the community. But just recently in this, political season, I've introduced a comment or a thought that made sense to me, and I call it tri-ideological, because relative, and this is how to determine growth citywide, which is important, and in the town center and the other sub areas. King County authorized around 13,000 houses to be built in what is now the geographic shape of our city from 1980 to 1999. And at incorporation, we had in the King County pipeline another 3,500. This is the major bulk of what's been built in the city. From 1999 till 2023, Sammamish enabled roughly 3,500 houses. And to be fair, those were mostly built from 2006 until 2023. What is tri-ideological? Relative to the pace of growth that King County allowed from 1980 to 99 at incorporation, the city of Sammamish had minimized significantly that level of growth. But then from 2018 to roughly 2022, another council took and notched that down much lower overall. I call that very low growth. And there's been a movement of which I'm involved in others that is optimal growth, to add housing that we need as compared to housing that we do not, relative to our authentic economic and demographic and workforce makeup over cycle of life and future generations. I contend that we have a significant oversupply of large single-family homes priced at 1.3 million and higher, and we have significant undersupplies of market rate housing from roughly 500 to 1.2 million, affordable housing in the neighborhood of 175 to 500, and some alternative to large single family for many high-income families in Sammamish, condos and other forms, the townhomes and large rentals. That's my sort of off-script bit. What we need to trailblaze on is to get into determining what our needs are, and that's done by identifying many factors and then those in the know discussing their opinion, what those factors mean to them. More on this topic, but I think we need to tweak our path to make up past housing supplies over the next 10 years. Appreciate the opportunity for the non-agenda comment.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else?
No more comments.
Great. All right, let's move on to the old business item, which is an ongoing, pretty involved topic, and that is our comprehensive plan update. David, are you doing an introduction, or are we going to go directly to Jeff to do the presentation?
I think we could go right to Jeff.
Okay. We have Jeff Rango from Framework here, and I'm hoping he's going to present something.
I am. Thank you. Good evening, planning commissioners. Excited to be here, and just give me a moment. I will get the slideshow pulled up here.
At work, I try to have some dad jokes handy for this, but I've gotten out of the habit of bringing those with me to these meetings, so that's probably a blessing for everyone else.
We appreciate that.
Okay. Everyone able to see that okay?
Yes.
That's it.
Okay. So again, good evening, commissioners and members of the community. Jeff Arango with Framework, and I am the project manager for the consulting team. And again, I couldn't be more excited to be with you this evening. We've been working on this update for just under 2 years now. And I want to recognize all of those that have participated in the process and shown leadership on this effort. I think Sammamish is in an excellent position to finish this project out, had the foresight to start the project early to really involve the community and leaders in the process. So I want to thank the City Council, the Planning Commission, City Manager's Office. Special thanks to all the planning staff, have been very committed to this process and really ensuring a high product for the community. And then all the members of the public that have participated in various stages of the process. So thank you all very much. We wouldn't have gotten here without you. So with that said, we're going to kind of go through 3 main parts of the process or of the plan development, the process in progress, the vision, and then previews of each of the elements. And the stage that we're at right now, we're going to be sending to the Planning Commission tomorrow a draft of Volume 1 of the comprehensive plan, and that's kind of our focus. We will follow up with Volume 2, which is more of the technical background information and includes some content you've seen to date. Just a quick reminder, this is an update, and while it is a major update, it's not a completely new plan. So some of the content that you will see in the goals and policies, while it's been significantly reviewed and refined, there is definitely language from the existing plan in there as well. We have some new elements as well, which I'll go through, and we're certainly interested in lots of feedback and refinement, but at this point, we're not looking to add major new components to the project. So, I've been doing planning in Washington for almost 15 years now. I was very involved in the last periodic update in 2016, working with a number of communities and counties on their plan updates. And I can say that this one is very unique, both in terms of the requirements from the state, the region, and the county, but also some of the timing. I mean, some of the new legislation actually happened midstream while we've been working on the plan. So we've had to really be flexible and adapt to that. And I think the city's done a really good job dealing with that. So one of our big goals and one of the things we have to do is really ensure compliance with all of these new requirements. We presented a lot of information about this at previous Planning Commission meetings, and we'll continue to do so. It's taken a lot of effort and clarification to get there, but I think we're on really very solid ground. Of course, working with the community and making sure that their vision becomes reality. So, putting the plan together is an important step, but we're really mindful of the important work it's going to take to really implement the plan. We wanted a more streamlined and focused plan that can really set up the community priorities for implementation. pare down and focus the goals and policies. We will be working on code updates, so it'll be a key part of implementation. And then exciting to bring forward 2 new elements: economic development, first economic development element for the city, and then the climate change and resiliency element, which comes out of the climate action plan. That is a new requirement. It's not due till 2029, so Sammamish is well ahead of the curve on that, which is fantastic. So this is one of the first pages in the plan, and we like to put this there just to really kind of set the tone, that it's really the community's plan, that it really reflects their input and their values. Even though this is a relatively high-level policy action plan, it is intended to be a plan of action, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we make the transition from the plan itself to implementation. And that implementation program really does kick off after the adoption of the plan, and it will continue for 20 years. There will be another major update in another 10 years, which will be an opportunity to refine it. And there's some important monitoring that will need to happen along the way as well. So some of the major components that we've completed to date, and this kind of shows the process here. The little green bar is actually the development of the plan. So you can see in the 20-year planning period, the development of the plan is actually a very short period of time. And then you have, 20 years of implementation, and that's going to require some monitoring, some refinement, may involve some tweaks to the plan itself, modifying some of the implementation strategies, continued public engagement, which is always really important. And that will be ongoing. So some of the things that we've completed: existing conditions reports, those end up being folded into volume 2. And we're relying heavily on a lot of the other great work that the city's been doing, like the Housing Diversification Toolkit, the new PROS plan. Excited to see the transit plan coming together, and then the launch of the TMP. The planning summit was held in the fall of 2022 over several days, and that was one of our marquee engagement events. We had sessions on specific topics and had, I think, pretty good involvement on that. We did a number of land use scenarios and looking at development of the new future land use map, referred to as the FLUME. And a lot of that was really, again, trying to get to the compliance with all of the new requirements, which also involves some land use modeling, which is kind of settling down now and kind of in its final stages. Several meetings with the Planning Commission along the way, as well as the City Council. Those were attended by the public and opportunities to receive comments. The city staff led a fantastic block party open house as well that had really good attendance. And then now we're at the Planning Commission, starting the Planning Commission review of the draft, which will then eventually go to the City Council and out for a public review as well along the way. So that's kind of generally the process and some of the key milestones to date. So some of the other engagement efforts, I mentioned the Planning Summit. We also did the Love Letters to Sammamish engagement event last year during Valentine's Day. We've done focus groups on a number of topics, including economic development and also for the Climate Action Plan. There's been outreach at the farmers market and at Earth Day. There was an economic development survey. The policy workshop held in October with City Council, Planning Commission, and other city leaders, which was very informative and really helped us in terms of refining the goal and policy priorities for the community, and then ongoing Planning Commission and City Council meetings, which will continue until the plan is adopted. Now we'll get into the vision, and then we'll go through the element previews after that. So as you'll recall, we got kind of tasked with developing the vision following on the community visioning project, which predated us, but provided a lot of really good information for us. We wanted to keep a lot of those themes and some of the priorities that had already been identified in the existing plan. So the vision is really centered around kind of these 3 themes of people, planet, and prosperity. And then there's 10 vision strategies that go along with it. This was adopted by council resolution previously, and so this is moving forward as a key part of the plan. These are the 10 vision strategies. There's 3 under the first bucket, sustainable, natural, and built environment, 4 under the equitable social environment, and then 3 under the viable economic development. And these really kind of provide the foundation or really kind of the priorities, the highest level priorities for the city going forward. And I think we want to see that both the vision and the vision strategies be really prominent and useful and kind of guide to city decision making over time. This is a newer version of a graphic that we had previously, but it's really important, I think, to demonstrate, how we're making these things a reality and how we're expressing them throughout the plan. And so these little diagrams show the connection between the vision strategies and the elements. So, for example, if you were really interested in how the city's looking to support local business and entrepreneurship, this would tell you kind of where to look. So looks like the economic development element, no surprise, would have the most information on that, and then to some degree these other elements. So it's a little bit of wayfinding, but these are also threaded through the elements just to make sure that we're including content that actually does connect back to the vision strategies, and they're not just sort of left hanging without specific goals and policies and other measures to implement them. So within each element, there are goal statements, there are policy statements, and there are strategy statements. We have definitions of each of them. Policy and strategy are kind of used interchangeably within the document in the sense that where it lists land use policy here, 1.1, for example, through 1.7, some of these are more strategies and some of them are kind of more policies. But again, this just provides an example from land use of how that is kind of put together. We went through various discussions about, how to make the plan more actionable. And there are a couple of different approaches. One is you put a lot more content in the plan itself, which is good in a sense because, it's more visible, but it can become problematic in a sense if it, really hasn't been vetted in terms of city resources and priorities for moving forward. So the other strategy is to use some of the other specific functional plans and department work programs to really use those mechanisms to implement the plan. I think that's kind of the direction that we're going. So there will be some more work to do in terms of setting up the implementation strategy once we get more review and feedback on the plan itself. So that's kind of the direction that we're headed there. And now we'll go through previews of each of the elements. So the land use element is really the foundation of the comp plan and the basis for which other elements kind of play off of. City has a growth target of 2,100 housing units and 728 jobs. And the FLUME establishes development capacity, so where development can occur. And new in this cycle, we have to provide capacity not only for the 2,100 units and 728 jobs, but specific types of affordable housing. And specific types of affordable housing, particularly at the lower income levels, can only occur in certain types of housing units per guidance from the Department of Commerce. So we have to show capacity in certain types of housing like apartments, as well as other types of middle housing and single family homes as well. So another key part of this effort was developing a new approach to the future land use map, and we'll show you those examples here in a moment, but really making the future land use map more of a distinguished planning tool from the zoning map. It's very common for cities to have their zoning map and future land use map kind of mirror each other. The challenge with that is anytime you want to make a zoning change, you have to go back and update the comp plan. There are limitations on how often you can update the comp plan. For various reasons. And so by having a future land use map that has more general categories with more options for zoning, it provides greater flexibility, and we'll show you how that works. We want to set it up to expand opportunities for affordable housing based on the planning mandates. We want to introduce mixed-use center designations in the other commercial and mixed-use areas in the city, as well as potential locations for future neighborhood serving commercial areas referred to as neighborhood centers. And then we've added some wildlife corridors and bridges, which is some mapping that we got from King County. That's also been shown on there. And then over on the right just shows the existing land use breakdown in the city. So this is the existing future land use map from the current comp plan. Apologize if this is a little bit difficult to read. It's a screenshot. But you can see over here on the right, on the left-hand side, that all of the categories are the same as you would see in the zoning district. So R1, R4, R6. R8, whereas our approach would be to show one future land use map designation for one or more of these categories, which would then allow the city to rezone those properties from one zone to another without necessarily having to update the future land use map. So we have sort of new terminology and, again, more flexibility in how it gets used. And this is the newly proposed future land use map. You can see the categories are more general. The neighborhood residential is generally the area currently that contains the single family zones. We will have to make some changes to comply with HB 1110, which is the middle housing bill, but we will have some flexibility to choose some different zoning districts and how we apply that through the city. Urban residential is sort of the next level up of residential areas within the city, generally located around the existing town center and mixed-use centers. The mixed-use center is another new designation, but something that certainly is highlighted in the existing plan as well. And then the town center. We also included some conceptual potential sub-areas that could be used for future sub-area planning, which is also a key land use strategy. And then the prospective neighborhood center generally identifies potential locations, but does not necessarily take the step at this time to formally establish those, and those could be established through a variety of future mechanisms. So now we'll move on to housing, which is another one of the key topics for updates as part of this effort. HB 1110 is the middle housing bill. This was passed, I believe, about a year ago. So while we had already been working on the comp plan, requires cities based on different criteria to allow middle housing expressed as a certain number of units per lot. There's also a bit of an affordability requirement. You have to allow more units if a certain number are affordable. Also have to allow 6 of 9 middle housing types that are listed in the bill. We spent quite a bit of time going over this a year or so ago. We will be bringing this back as we start to develop code for this. But we did get, I think, pretty far with the commission and the council in terms of selecting those housing types and a general strategy for how we would approach it. So look forward to bringing that back and getting more feedback from the commission and the community. And then HB 1220, which passed before that, and that's really where a lot of the affordable housing requirements come, and where the requirement to not only provide capacity just for the growth target, but for specific affordability levels. That all comes from HB 1220, and that amended the Growth Management Act. So we have new policies and strategies specifically to address updates in the Puget Sound Regional Council regional plan. As well as King County countywide planning policies. We want to look at ways to implement appropriate housing types to address all segments of the community, provisions for permanently supportive and emergency housing, which is another requirement, as is addressing racially disparate impacts, displacement, and inclusion. And we have a document that summarizes that, and then clarification and enhancement of the physical characteristics that make Sammamish neighborhoods unique. So as part of our HB 1110, the middle housing bill will actually get to explore what that might look like on specific properties within Sammamish, similar to what we did for some of the efforts as part of the Phase 2 development regulations update as well. So look forward to that piece coming up as well. So some of the planning themes, again, it's ensuring people of all income levels have access to housing, supporting middle housing, addressing the any racially disparate impacts, and supporting community and sustainability goals. This shows generally where we've identified capacity that can support the different types of housing units that we need to be able to accommodate. So again, this is just kind of a theoretical breakdown of the 2,100 units and where it could go, understanding we don't know exactly how development is going to play out. But in terms of our demonstrating compliance, this is an important piece. Okay, transportation. So we are going to be doing a new transportation element, and the city's also going to be working on the transportation master plan. We understand, of course, that transportation is a frequent concern that we hear as part of our public engagement efforts. We want to ensure that we have transportation to support access to opportunities for jobs and housing and services and amenities within Sammamish, including more opportunities for people to live and work in Sammamish. And then prioritize approaches that increase physical activity, social interaction, and community health and well-being, which is another one of the new requirements. Parks and Recreation, cities put together a fantastic update to the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan that we'll be using to develop the parks element in partnership with the city. Some of the themes are ensuring that people of all backgrounds have access to parks and the planning process and decision-making, increasing connectivity throughout the city and coordinating with other partners, and then aligning with citywide climate change policies through parks maintenance and design practices. And the city's first economic development element, we presented a preview of that to the Planning Commission a few weeks back, or maybe it was a little longer than that. Really exciting and really starts to set the foundation for future economic development efforts within the city, and has relationship to affordable or workforce housing, supporting growth in the town center. Expanding activities and destinations in Inglewood, Pine Lake, and Klahani. People really want more, social opportunities, more things to do, more arts and cultural events. Really, really strong desire for that within the community that we want to accommodate. And then helping to plan for the new neighborhood centers, enhancing access to goods and services deeper within Sammamish's neighborhoods. The shoreline element has undergone somewhat minimal changes. Shoreline element really comes from the Shoreline Master Plan, which is, even though it's locally developed, is actually becomes a state law. And so making changes to that really needs to be coordinated with any update in the Shoreline Master Plan, which is not only a plan, but also a regulatory document. Some of the themes are building climate resiliency to adapt and prepare for climate change impacts, balancing the preservation of environmental assets with the creation of new housing and employment, and exemplify and enact sustainable practices in our organization and within the community. Capital facilities and utilities really draws from a number of the other elements. Any capital project, regardless of the type of project, whether it's a parks project, a street project, something to do with city facilities, needs to be addressed in the capital facilities and utilities element. Right now, those are separate elements, and we're combining them for efficiency. We have to develop or reference a 6-year capital plan and provide all the necessary infrastructure to serve the land use plan. We need to develop a funding and a financing plan and demonstrate that we have an ability to fund these projects. We can also include a 20-year capital facilities list. It's not required, but it can be more general. It doesn't need the same level of detail on costing or funding, but it can be a great list to have with which to draw projects up into the 6-year capital plan at appropriate times. There's also been some ongoing discussions with city staff about ways to develop sort of a more holistic capital facilities program, which I think is a great idea and something that can be kind of frequently updated on an annual basis in the same way that the transportation improvement program is by state mandate. So we'll be doing further coordination with city departments to be rolling that in. We have another team member on our team specifically to do the financing and funding component of that. And so what you're seeing is volume 1 in this upcoming draft, and then volume 2 will have, again, more of the technical background information. And we'll also be coordinating and have been coordinating with outside service providers, as many of the capital facilities and utilities are not provided by the city of Sammamish. Climate change and resiliency really, again, comes from the Climate Action Plan. The city went through a very extensive process, both internal and external, to develop the Climate Action Plan. It's really a great document. We've been working with Brightworks to develop the climate element, and that's the draft you'll be seeing here tomorrow. Really reflects, I think, a lot of community input and effort on part of city leaders to pull this together. It's got some very ambitious goals that we're mindful of, and trying to support those throughout other elements as well. So some of the next steps, again, we'll be sharing a preliminary draft with the Planning Commission for feedback. And I think some of the things we're interested in hearing from you are identifying areas where you feel like the goals and policies are unclear and what they're trying to achieve. Understanding that the intent is for them to feed an implementation program. Identify goals and policies that you might think are too wordy or specific, an action they propose to an action they propose, identify goals or policies that feel redundant or could be consolidated, and respond to questions at the head of each section. So in the document we'll provide you, there'll be these little call outs that will provide some information specific to the feedback that we're looking on. So look for those. And we'll be providing a link to a tool called Convio. Very easy to use, but it's essentially just a PDF document and you can click on it and leave a comment. If any of the commissioners need assistance or guidance, members of our team can be available to do that. We've been using this for our internal review with city staff. We've also been using it externally with planning commissions for some of our other clients with great success, and I think you'll find it a very useful tool. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you this evening, and I'll turn it back over to Chair Bachman, and happy to take any comments or answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Anybody have any questions about what we're being asked to do or anything else related to the upcoming review? Ajay?
Yes, I have a couple
Go
of
ahead.
questions. Jeff, as always, a fantastic presentation. Can I ask you to go back to the element matrix slide?
Yes.
I forgot the slide number. Sorry about that.
I got it. Just give me 1 second here.
Okay. Great. First of all, I don't have questions on this one. I just want to say that this is fantastic representation. This is the best, and this is so easy to grasp and get through. Thank you so much for doing it this way. This is much more easier than what we've had in the past, so this is great. Thank you so much. That's the first thing that I had. My questions are starting from slide 16. Can you go to slide 16, please? Okay. When I saw the slide, I had a question to say that when we are talking of future land use management and we consider last winter when there was an excessive amount of water flow in the on the banks of Lake Sammamish and how it was going through, doesn't that change how we are going to look at land use management? Doesn't that change some of these things where if we try to do some work of water flow management and other things, wouldn't that change our plans here? And is that part of the effort where you have given that asterisk, which was to say that exact boundaries are yet to be defined?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think, regarding stormwater impacts, typically not directly reflected in a future land use map. If it's related to like wetlands or critical areas, there is a provision under GMA that does let you make land use changes in cases where you have a high concentration of critical areas or environmental constraints. But to my knowledge, something like a heavy rain period or stormwater events would typically not result in a city necessarily changing its land use map. If that was a persistent thing over time and we felt like it was a significant development limitation, then the city would have to go and take a look at that and see if they wanted to make any changes, zoning changes to respond to that. I can follow up with the city on that. It's not an issue that has come up in our process. So if anything comes out of those conversations, I'm happy to circle back with the Planning Commission if there's any new information.
I'd be happy to jump in and offer a little bit more on that too. Thank you, Jeff, for that explanation. So Lake Sammamish is actually really fascinating, and I've been working on a lot of, been part of a lot of work on that over the years in my time in Bellevue as well. So if you have to think about Lake Sammamish as really a part of a larger system. One of the issues with Lake Sammamish and why we have the water level issues we've had over the years is mostly due to the north end of the lake and the Willamore confluence where the county manages vegetation. So it really depends on how you manage the outlet of the lake, and if the county is in an active vegetation removal cycle, the water gets out of the lake a lot faster. During other years when they don't manage the vegetation, water backs up in the lake and causes impoundment, if you will. There's actually a study underway. The Willamore, King County's chartered with a group of interjurisdictional group. It's the Willamore flood prevention program. I think you could Google Willamore Weir or Willamore flood management, and you'd find the document. I could also send it out after this. I also wanted to note that the sub-area planning required asterisk with the exact boundaries. That's something that is to be studied going forward. Those are the best boundaries we could come up with. And also those are areas that are a high opportunity in large part because they have existing impervious surface, and any redevelopment of those areas would not necessarily add to stormwater problems. It could in fact fix some stormwater problems by way of adding detention, retention to those sites where they don't currently have it or where it's currently undersized. So that's part of the whole thought process there, is that those areas are primed for redevelopment because of their underdeveloped nature, their lack of stormwater facilities, and the extensive nature by which they are paved over and constitute impervious surfaces.
Got it. Thank you so much. Actually, you answered a number of questions I had on number slide 16, so that's great. Thank you so much. Jeff, going back to your point, I'm just going to rephrase what you just said, which is to say that if we find out over 2 or 3, and you as well, Ms. David, if we find out in the next 2 or 3 winters, like December's, when it's like soggy and wet and everything, and it changes the way the water is flowing down the plateau and into this one, we might come back and review this in a monitoring model, but we are comfortable at this point to how we are working on this one. Should I take that as the answer for that?
From the city side, yes. And I think that one of the reasons why is when we look at this map, the future land use map, the majority of the area is neighborhood residential, which is currently neighborhood residential. We don't anticipate a lot of change in those areas. There are obviously House Bill 1110 could result in some multiplication of lots in areas outside of HOAs. But as we've talked about previously, you know, our rough back of the napkin estimation is that about 80% of the city is occupied by HOAs. About another 10% is critical areas. That leaves you about 10% of the city where that could actually happen. And you know, that then requires somebody wanting to do that. So we don't see a flood of division of properties under HB 1110 happening in the city in the near term.
Got it.
So that's really important. I do want to point out while we're on the slide that there is one area where we have identified through some of our analysis around best zoning practices and other opportunities for some additional middle housing, is if you see on this map immediately to the west of town center, there is an area that is identified as targeted for urban residential with this update. Now, the character of that current area, or the I guess the existing zoning of that area, is R1. So that would be a stark departure and would constitute a change. So I want to be aware, make sure everyone's aware that the only thing on this map that is actually proposing a change, aside from the addition of the potential future sub areas, which would require additional planning, really that's just showing where we need to do some additional work in the future, is that other area, is that area right there that's just to the west of town center along 4th. And now that will require some additional work as we move forward, and it's just because it's shown on this map here does not mean that it is something that will end up in the final product. But that is an area where there's opportunity and where there is the potential to build some additional middle housing types. I've spoken with some neighbors down there. You know, there's interest in you know, keeping it how it is, but there's also interest in maybe seeing that that's R4 or R6, or if it was to become R12 or R18, there's a strong interest in making sure that there is a proper transition area, a separation, that there's the right amount of tree retention. So I do want to make sure that we're highlighting that for you, because out of all the things in this comp plan that are changing the most, it's the future land use map. And the only change that we're really making with that transition or proposing to make with that transition is that one area that's just to the west of town center.
Got it. Got it. That's a great segue to my next question, which is on slide 17, Jeff. Because my question on this one was to say that with this, what we are proposing over here, of what we are doing with the legislation and how we are trying to address that, and the fact that we are doing the middle housing that we have, that we talked about in the last slide, do we have a measure of, I mean, even if it's a rough measure of how much we are solving the missing middle, which was a raving topic in the first few meetings? Is that something that we should look at to say, hey, actually we have, I mean, we've solved, or we're solving, or how are we going on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can answer that on a couple of levels. I mean, the first thing is we have to make some regulatory changes to accommodate it. And we work with a lot of partners, that have been doing this work both in the state and around the country. And I think, generally what they see is the uptake, the amount of middle housing that gets developed is, typically a pretty small percentage. It might, gain momentum over time, but it tends to not be big numbers and tends to be smaller scale, more infill type projects. With respect to Sammamish, because a lot of our growth target is in affordable housing at 50% and below. Not a lot of that would really be accommodated in the middle housing. So in terms of like what the percentage of our growth target that could be accommodated in middle housing, it's relatively low, I would say. But with that said, again, it's a bit of a difficult thing to predict. As David said, a lot of the city is restricted from allowing this through HOAs. So I think a big part of it is really setting up a monitoring program and kind of seeing how things play out and being able to adapt. And then as we get more into the meat of developing the new regulations for HB 1110, we'll have some more community outreach, be able to share some graphics and some examples that I think will be informative for the community and those involved in development within Sammamish. So it's a little bit difficult thing to predict, but again, I don't think, from my best professional guess, it will be a huge part of the growth in the near term, particularly.
I see. Okay, you just took it out of the planning commission and put it in the city council meeting, so that's totally fine. That's great. Let's go to slide number 25. This is my last question.
Sure.
Okay, so in here, we're talking of climate change and resiliency. So I had a couple of questions on this. If we were to talk about, here are some candidates for EV stations, because we are talking of trying to build a climate element with resilience and greenhouse gas emissions and other things. So if we were to try to build that, is our goal then that we will try to identify areas where we will say that we need to bring these 6 areas as EV station charging locations and other things, or that we're going to talk about some areas some measures that we should take up for that, to address that? I was looking at point number 2, and I thought, if we are going to talk about 30% reduction of per capita vehicle, then shouldn't we give a much clearer directive for the citizenry to be able to manage that? Or is this again part of how the city council has to handle it, and we are just in a position to say that this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, good question. I mean, some of the parts of the climate action plan and climate element are specific to city operations and what the city, specifically is in control of. Some of these obviously are broader kind of community goals and will happen in a variety of ways. Specific to the EV chargers, there's requirements to allow them via the state. So there's some regulatory allowances that cities are required to have. In terms of the city itself, it could identify city facilities for installing them, as could private businesses, grocery stores and things like that. Frequently will install them. So there's a variety of ways that the EV chargers can happen. Some could be city-led, but I think a lot of them would be done through private means as well.
I could add to that
Kelly or
too.
David. Yeah,
So exciting news. We passed new building codes this past Tuesday night with our city council. And with the new building code, there is a requirement that for new construction of multifamily, I don't think it's trickled back down to single family yet, that you're required to, and I think it's also commercial space, that you're required to include a certain number of parking stalls that are equipped with electric car charging facilities. And in addition to that, you're required to provide a certain number of vehicle stalls that are wired and ready to install electric car charging facilities. And you're also required to provide a certain number of stalls that are roughed in or have conduit, if you will. They're forward compatible with the installation of electric car charging facilities. That's for new construction, so unless we're building new buildings, it doesn't really help us with what we have now. But the other part of that would be retrofit going backwards, and there's quite a bit of grant money we're seeing coming out of the state and the federal government, and we would need to situate ourselves with plans like this and with some shovel-ready, so to speak, actions of how we could start to work those into the city on public properties, work with the school districts, work to collaborate on that. And our sustainability coordinator is hard at work, as one of her elements that she's working on is implementing the climate action plan, which includes things like trying to figure out how to get car charging stations distributed around the city.
Got it. So we should use this as our North Star and keep working that along with it.
This makes us attractive to grants.
I see.
So it makes us attractive as a grant recipient because we already are committing to trying to achieve this. So now we could show the implementation end is the next step. So, but your task is to look at the high level goal, make sure that the high level goal is in alignment with where you think it should be, understanding that we have a climate action plan that's already been adopted. One of the other challenges with the climate action plan and the climate change and resiliency element is that once you put policy language into the comp plan, it becomes a Growth Management Act related policy that the city can't just change on a whim. There's quite a process to amend the comprehensive plan. You have to docket it. It goes through formal review. It ends up being something that you can only do once a year. There has to be a reason why you're doing it. Whereas the climate action plan is more something that we can change, based on a certain awareness or condition or something that we're trying to address. So you want to be careful not to elevate the entire climate action plan into the comp plan because it becomes more restricted in how you can change it going forward. So what you're trying to do is pull up those policies or things that stand out as really directional, North Star, if you will, and put those in the climate change and resiliency element, and then leave the rest of it to the climate action plan for implementation and for refinement that can happen, fairly quickly and allows us to remain nimble in how we approach these topics.
Got it. That's great. And we will get new graphs of these emissions that we are seeing right now for 2019 as we proceed with it, so that we can use the climate action plan as the proper.
I think we're required to, what is it, Jeff and Kelly report out in 5 years, I think, if I'm correct?
Got it.
Correct.
So 2024 would be a good time to look at that again, and then we will find out where we are and then take it from there. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. Got it. Those are the questions I have. Thank you so much.
All right, who else? Syed, you got something? Go ahead.
Jeff, thank you very much for the very education-driven report, and I learned a lot from looking at these slides and the information that you share with us. I've got quite a number of questions. The first question, the plan is based on 4 goals. Are these goals, maybe David, you can elaborate on that. Are these goals established by the City Council?
I'm waiting for that slide, the land use goals.
There are 4 goals. You don't have it at the slide. You have it on part of the document that I saw on the internet. Let me read it to you. It's the supporting growth, greater option and mobility, operation, maintenance, management, and safety, and sustainability. Are these the goals that these are the goals from the previous comp plan?
Yeah, so I would take those as themes.
Themes.
So they're not so much goals as they are themes with this update cycle. These are things that are we're finding, the state is asking us to take on, themes we've heard with our community outreach, and these are things that we are working to address with this update. They're the main themes. There's many others as well, but they're the ones we wanted to float to the surface to make sure you caught the big. If we were to give you a one-page overview, these would be the things that would stand out the most. Am I correct on that, Jeff?
Yeah, nailed it.
Jeff, in one of the slides, actually, you made a reference that potential updating of the goals and policies. Didn't I see that in one of the first slides?
Yeah, we've gone through a very extensive process. I mean, we committed to doing this when we started the project very early on, that we would go through all of the existing goals and policies, right? Because those had been developed as part of previous community processes with a lot of input. So we wanted to honor those, go through them. So again, some of the language is being carried forward. Some of it is new. Some of it has been modified. But yes, we did review all of the existing goals and policies against all of the new policy requirements that we have to adhere to.
The new 3 sub-areas, Inglewood, Pine Lake, and Klahani, would they have any non-residential use, retail use, or it's too early to talk about that?
No, I think they definitely would. I mean, right now they allow commercial and residential, but they're primarily commercial. There's not been residential, even though there is capacity to do it. And I think as part of this sub-area planning effort, the city can look at calibrating the zoning to get the type of mix of uses it wants. But I think the mixed-use centers are certainly a key part of the housing strategy. They're also a really key part of the economic development strategy. And I think the way that we can provide more activities, things to do, places to see your friends and neighbors, events, those types of things really can happen. Of course, first in the town center and also these other areas.
If somebody asks what is the definition of urban residential, what would you say?
Well, I would say it's a higher density than the neighborhood residential. Again, because the middle housing bill has come into place, things have shifted around a bit. But the urban residential is, again, a little bit more intense than you might find in the middle housing areas and neighborhood residential, but it's also, as David demonstrated earlier, co-located around these walkable mixed-use areas. So there's a locational aspect, and then I think there's a bit of an urban form aspect to those. So that's kind of the intention there. It's like single-use areas, residential, but generally a little bit more intense than you'd find in the neighborhood residential and in areas that provide proximity and walking distance to the commercial areas.
If you look at the future land use, which is slide 16, one question came to my mind is that, are we talking about possibly some downzoning in some areas?
No, and the reason for that is that the neighborhood residential includes areas that are currently zoned R1 to R8, is the range of zones that are contemplated under neighborhood residential. Urban residential is R12 to R18, currently zoned, except for that one area that I identified to the west of town center, which is currently zoned R1. And the neighborhood center and mixed-use centers are currently zoned as such. It's important to point out that the state has given us a tall order, all the cities a tall order. The state has basically said that the days of single-family detached residential dwellings is over. And we no longer have the ability as a city to restrict zoning to not allow attached buildings and middle housing types. So one of the challenges here is that we cannot retain a future land use map that shows single family detached land use designations. So we have to make the transition as a city in following House Bill 1110, which directs that cities must adopt middle housing types, shall not preclude the construction of middle housing types on any lot in the city, shall not preclude division of lots in any lot in the city, except that there is an exclusion written in there related to community covenants and restrictions associated with homeowners associations. So as long as your community, your neighborhood is a homeowners association that has a community covenant or restriction on the property that limits the type of housing that can be built there, then the mandate for allowance for middle housing type attached, duplexes, townhomes, et cetera, and the division into 2 lots does not apply. This is why we're not as concerned about it as some cities that are older. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that most of the modern subdivisions that we have, there's a point in time when Washington State adopted what's known as subdivision law. And when subdivision law went into effect is when most of the divisions in Sammamish occurred after that date. We do have some older divisions like Englewood and Tamarack, which predate subdivision law, that do not have covenants and community covenants attached to them like and homeowners associations like the modern subdivisions. So some of our neighbors like Issaquah or Bellevue, or thinking about some other parts of other cities that are older, that predate subdivision law, have quite a bit of impact from HB 1110. But some of the cities that are newer and have mostly new subdivisions have a lesser impact. It's just part of the way that law applies.
One quick just point of clarification. David gave a great summary. I just wanted to point out that single family will continue to be allowed. It's just that the other middle housing types will also be allowed. So all of the areas shown in yellow, single family will still be an allowed use.
David, you made reference to the 80% of is that the population or number of dwelling units under HOA?
Yeah, so again, back of the napkin estimate, right? We don't have a comprehensive list of all of the HOAs and a map of where all of those exist in the city. We'd love to, but we inherited that from the county, and we did not inherit a map with that. So it's a bit of a work effort. We are aware of it. We'd like to start working on that in the next year. It's mixed with all our other priorities of maps we want to create. So take that with a grain of salt. The 80% estimate that I have comes from the amount of land of the city that is covered with HOAs. So if you think about all of the neighborhoods, I mean, if you look at this map, you can start to see where all of those neighborhoods are located. It's 80% of the developed land in the city, we'll put it that way, is probably encumbered with it. It could be encumbered with an HOA. Or a community covenant, I guess I should say.
So can I conclude that we're dealing with we were talking about a master plan for the next 20 years that only would be available to cover the areas of 20% of the city?
Yeah, depending on what the ratios are. Yeah, I mean, it could be as low as 60%. But what I'm saying is that a large portion of the city is encumbered by covenants, community covenants, that don't allow anything except detached single-family dwellings and don't allow the redivision of land or redivision of lots within those neighborhoods. And in those areas, we will not see the duplication of lots or the middle housing types be built until something changes, until the neighborhood agrees to amend the covenant, or the state rules that covenants do not stand anymore, which could happen. There are all sorts of things that could happen here. But for now, that's what we're left with.
We have heard over and over again that for the next 20 years, we need to accommodate 2,100 dwelling units, and then the job of 728. Where is the basis for that employment, 728? Is that based on the land use calculation, some kind of assumptions in there?
You want me to take that, David, or would you
Sure,
like to take that one? So yeah, both the housing and the jobs, I think in particular the housing numbers come from the state first. They then filter down through PSRC and the county. And then there's a process, somewhat collaborative process between the county and the cities. And some of it is based on the different categories that cities find themselves in. Some of the targets are also based on the current conditions of the community and makeup of their housing stock. So because Sammamish, doesn't have a big supply of affordable housing, we got a larger target of affordable housing. The jobs, similarly, I think, are kind of tailored towards the opportunities to develop jobs and current jobs within the community. So, for example, Sammamish has a much obviously lower growth target than say Redmond, which has very, very high employment and jobs. So it's a bit of an amorphous process, but working with it ultimately comes from the county is the answer on that.
Jeff, I didn't hear that much about the forward looking on some of these issues. For instance, the jobs as we talked about, climate change, transportation, AI, population profile, population growth. Are you going to be kind of putting some thinking about that, what's going to happen in the future with AI or the new technology in transportation and how that would affect changes in land use or the things that we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly, I don't know, as we've talked about AI, specifically, but, obviously one of the big trends is work from home. And, I guess AI is related to that. And how, community needs change when, you're spending more of your time in your neighborhood versus commuting, outside and trying to figure out what those needs are over the planning period. So I wouldn't say anything super specific, but we've definitely been talking about it. We've been trying to track the work from home trends, which are down a little bit from I think the peak during COVID, but still higher than pre-COVID. And I expect that that will probably continue in some fashion and something the city needs to monitor. And I think it potentially has huge implications for not only land use and economic development, but in particular transportation. So as we continue to develop this monitoring program and be prepared to do this reporting that we'll be required to do in 5 years, I think that'll absolutely be one of those trends that we'll want to track and see if there's reasons to adapt any of the plan accordingly.
And also, as far as the climate change and potential things that probably is going to be in the future is going to be affecting us, I didn't hear that much about the solar energy. Are you going to be covering that as a part of?
That is covered.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, it's covered extensively in the climate action plan, but that's more of an implementation approach. If our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to utilize alternative energy sources, then implementation would be found down lower in the climate action plan related to solar. And we have several policies and implementation strategies related to solar included in the climate action plan.
And my last question, Jeff, you mentioned about LOS and their capital facilities. This LOS, is it a transportation LOS or capital facilities LOS?
Yeah, so each type of capital facility actually gets its own LOS. And when we come back, we'll do more of a deep dive into this. But this is a really important thing. So like for transportation, your level of service, that becomes the standard by which you measure impacts of development. And there's also some new requirements per state law to not only look at vehicle level of service, but to develop what's called a multimodal level of service that could be both qualitative and quantitative. Look at things like where sidewalks are, how wide they are, types of bike facilities, those sorts of things. There's also a level of service associated with things like parks, and that can be done a variety of ways, just giving kind of general examples. Can be like the amount of park space per certain segment of the population. Some, have done it based on valuations. There can be an access component, where a park's related in relation to households and are they within walking distance. So all of the capital facilities get LOS. It's also the basis for which you develop impact fees. Impact fees can only be used to support growth. They can't be used to subsidize existing deficiencies within the system. So there's specific mechanisms to calculate that. And update the impact fees accordingly. So yeah, it is not just transportation. That's probably the most well-known type of level of service, but it will apply to basically all of the capital facilities over time.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hisham, go ahead.
Back to Sayed's question about the number of units and the number of jobs that we need to create. when is or was the start date, and have we achieved so far any of those required number of units?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So we started that work in 2019. So the snapshot is a 2019 year, and it's so we started working on the comp plan. The first step in that is to work with King County to execute or complete a buildable lands analysis, also known as a urban growth capacity study. So we followed guidance that's provided by the state and the county, and we basically provided all the data to them, and it results in a certain amount of capacity for both housing and jobs. And that then is fed into the system whereby, as Jeff described, we worked with the other cities that are in our, what I call our geography group. So we're in the cities and towns geography group under the Puget Sound Regional Council's sort of division and breakdown about how they're planning for the future in the region. And we then went through what's called the Growth Caucus process, where we met with the cities and towns cohort group in several meetings, and the county guided a collaborative negotiation, if you will, between the cities and towns to ultimately result in a growth target and a jobs target. And the collaborative process was largely reliant on parities, on understanding statistics that all the cities make up of the cities, right? So population, number of housing units, recent housing units developed, number of jobs, acreage, population, all sorts of things, right? And including one of the reasons why we're in the cities and towns group is because we don't have access to a major highway. Right, we have to go through other jurisdictions to get out of the city. So Sammamish might be bigger than some of the cities that are placed in other categories like Issaquah or Mercer Island, but Issaquah and Mercer Island have access to transit and to state highways and freeways. So Sammamish was put in a group that is ultimately responsible for a smaller percentage of growth in the region than those other cities. So our growth target is really pretty small for a city of our size when you start to look at it and stack it up against what all the other cities are doing around the region. But there's a reason for that, and it's because we're in the cities and towns group, and that's because we lack access to a highway.
But I do have to follow up with him. Like he asked you, like, what was the percentage, that we fulfilled as City of Sammamish. So out of 2,100 units, did we reach that goal, or out of
So that is the growth target for the 20-year planning horizon, which would end in 2044.
But it started in 2019.
Started in 2019, so it's not as so. So I want to say this without coming across as being flippant or difficult, that a lot of people want this to be a very square, neat thing, but it's not, right? So the way this whole process works, I've come to accept, because I wanted it to be neat and square at the beginning, and it's not. So we have achieved units that at the time when the snapshot was taken in 2019 were units in the pipeline. That included jobs. So for example, there was a new Issaquah School District elementary school built off of, what's the name of the road? I'm sorry. It's the one that was just built down.
228 or
no, further out to the southeast.
Okay.
Someone's going to be able to tell me what the name of that school is, but I apologize. So those were jobs that were in the pipeline at the time.
Okay.
And have now been provided. So we've already chiseled away at some of those jobs just since the snapshot was taken. For housing units, our town center, those units that have been still under review have been in the pipeline. They haven't been built. We had a few other plats and smaller projects that were in the pipeline. So not a lot of the units have been chiseled away at from the 2100, but some, right? And so we're tracking from that snapshot in time through the end of 2044 with this growth target. And Kelly, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or add any corrections where I might have veered out of my lane.
Fine. Looking for the mute button there. No, I'm just trying to think about that elementary school and the name of it. I'm sorry, I can't think of what the name of the school is, so I apologize.
No.
I should know because we worked on it quite extensively about 3 or 4 years ago.
That's okay. So David and Kelly, that means we are going to reach the goal in 2044. Is that the answer that I'm?
Well, so it's not a matter of trying to reach the goal. It's more a matter of trying to plan for the delivery of services within the planning horizon that mesh up with that goal. It's not a ceiling and it's not a floor.
So it's not a goal either then?
It's a benchmark that we're working against.
Okay.
It's so yes, I would say it's a housing target. It's a benchmark, right? It's something that we're planning for, but it's possible that we won't achieve that many units, but it's also possible that we'll achieve more. And again, it's something that we all kind of want to know with precision, how much are we going to grow, but it's really hard to predict that as a community.
And if I can just add one point, it's all market driven. So this is something we can't control, but what we can control is planning towards that number. And we will start reevaluating and doing our next periodic update. It will be due 2034, so we'll start working on it probably in 2032. So yeah, it like David said, it's a planning number, but what actually gets built is really out of the control of the city. It is all market based.
And one more thing to add, is we really appreciate Framework's work on this, and they're here to help us plan around that goal. What services should we be thinking about? What things in the community should we be ensuring are happening with that level of growth across a 20-year period? We will be revisiting this plan in 10 years, right? So it's really, you have opportunity. If it goes really fast, you have opportunity to recorrect again in 2034. And that work will actually start, if we go back 5 years before that, so it will start in 2029. So we're going to start doing that work again right around the corner here. And that's just how these cycles work. So remember, there's a couple numbers to keep in mind, and then I'll be quiet here in a sec, but there's a couple numbers to keep in mind. There's the capacity number, right? And that is the capacity that was the result of the city's participation in the urban growth capacity process with King County. The capacity number is something that's ultimately shown and adopted by King County through King County countywide planning policies as part of their growth, the county's growth strategy. So we have a number, you can see Sammamish in the table, and our growth capacity is listed there, and that's from that process. So that's the capacity number that we use with this process here. The other number is the growth target. And the growth target is that benchmark that we're working against over 20 years. We have to show that we're planning for the delivery of housing and services and everything in the city. And that if growth goes really fast, we have to ensure that we're on track with providing level of service for roads and parks and schools and all those things, right? If growth goes really slow, well, we need to make sure we're able to adjust that way too. So that's your growth target. That's your benchmark. Then there's one more number that's been added to the list this year. So in years past, it was pretty simple. Those were our two numbers. But the state decided to make things a little more complicated. And the state added under House Bill 1220 another number that is separate, not to be confused with the growth target, which is the housing allocation. And what this number is the state has assigned all of the cities in the region a housing allocation by way of the counties. That we are required to demonstrate that we are planning for and accommodating. We don't have to build it, but we have to show that we're accommodating and that we've removed barriers for, and we have a plan for how it could happen, affordable housing in the deep affordability range, 0 to 30%, 30 to 50%, 50 to 80% is where our range lies. And that number, to make things really confusing, happens to be the same number as our growth target. So, if you don't have any questions on this and you get it all, well, I admire you, but if you do and you're reading through this plan
unclear
over the next few weeks and you have questions, feel free to give us a call. Give me a call. I'm happy to talk about this. It's a bit confusing, but I want to try to point out there's 3 numbers you'll see. There's the capacity number, there's the growth target number, and then there's the housing allocation
number.
right?
Got it. Thank you, David.
And they're all separate things, and the growth target and the housing allocation, although it's the same number, are apples and oranges.
Separate but the same numbers. Thank you.
They have to live in the same world together, yes, but they're the same number.
But this is just a benchmark, not the goal.
Yeah.
So got it.
Yep. I'll be quiet now, so thank you.
Just one question.
I just want to get out of my lane for a second here and offer, the way it was described to me at one point, which I thought was helpful, what you kind of got at, David, is what we're obligated to do is to put in place policies, code, and plans that you could say allow these numbers, or maybe an alternative way to say it is do not restrict these numbers, the ones you described, from occurring. So that's why I think you say it's not really a goal or a target. It's that we have to put in place an environment that could allow this to happen. Whether it will or not, nobody knows, can't know, not really our job to make it happen, other than to create the environment where it can happen. And I think that's a pretty good description for me of what the city is required to do.
David was very clear. Got it.
I like Mark's enhancement, so thank you.
But the land use, the final land use plan supposed to be reflecting those numbers. Whatever the final land use, whatever it's going to be, that should be reflecting
And
number of dwelling units.
it does. So I don't know, Jeff, if you can toggle back to that slide that shows where the units might go in the city. There's a map. Oh, there it is.
So you want me to I can walk through this a little bit. So yeah, this I think really highlights what David was describing, right? So we have to plan for and accommodate the 2,100 units and the housing allocation, which is the breakdown of that. But again, we don't know exactly, how much development is going to happen in, say, the neighborhood residential zone versus the town center. But as an exercise to demonstrate compliance, we have to show how it could play out, right? And some of that is, for certain affordability levels, you have to show capacity in certain types of housing. So this is a breakdown that we put up, which is essentially a scenario, call it a scenario, of how the 2,100 units could play out based on the city's capacity. And so this shows the the units and jobs, that add up to the targets. Whether it will play out like this or not, I think obviously remains to be seen, but this, again, is part of our demonstration of compliance to the county and to the region.
I'd like to give the north end of the dais a chance to talk here. John, did you have anything?
No.
How about Mr. Bresco?
Going south. Yeah, I have 2 and then a clarification. So actually, on this slide, there's also, and I forget the exact number, like 400 emergency units. Is that right? There's some other phrase for that. Where does that show up? And when we're reading through the comprehensive plan, what should we look for and potentially comment on that? Because it's not the same as the 2,100, right?
Right. It is separate. There are specific provisions, or I should say guidance on how you accommodate that. We have a separate document that we've put together that we provided to the city specifically about that issue. For most communities, can be as simple as allowing it where you have existing motels, because those have proven to be viable strategies to convert kind of older motels to emergency housing. That's not something that exists in the city of Sammamish. So it'll essentially be a regulatory mechanism that will allow emergency housing to be developed in specific areas in the city.
Yeah, so I haven't seen anything like future land use maps or any of these kind of charts that show where those might show up or how we would enable those. So I guess that would be one thing when I'm reading through the comprehensive plan, that would make a comment somewhere, I guess, unless there's a specific area you could say, look here, and it's there.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but certainly I can follow up and provide more information on how we're planning to approach that. And again, it is more of a code issue in terms of accommodating that. So I'll follow up on that.
Okay. The future land use map, if you could go to that.
Yeah, sure.
And there's been talk about like trails and bike lanes and basically more multimodal kind of transportation. There's no indication of anything like that on this particular map. Will that show up from the transportation master plan or other maps or something like that?
Yes, yep, it's very frequent or common, I should say, to include that in the transportation element or the transportation master plan or a combination of both, where you would have a map showing existing facilities and then priority facilities by type. So I could make a note to make sure that we follow up on that as well. But yeah, that would be in the transportation element and or the transportation master plan.
Okay.
One thing to note is we tried adding some additional layers, other components to this map, but it gets really busy really quickly. So we had to distill it back down to its core purpose was really to show the land use designations. And any of those future neighborhood centers or sub areas, there's quite an extensive planning process that goes along with those that would identify trail connections and how they're serviced by pedestrians and all those things that go along with them. This is just pointing us to the future of, hey, we need to study these areas and figure out how these fit into the community. And it doesn't mean that there will be one. They could always be removed in 10 years if the council decides, the community decides that they don't want that there.
Yeah, well, and I'd say from the standpoint of where growth could go, this makes tons of sense. From standpoint of like that intermodality for transportation or critical areas that can't be developed, which I know a number of citizens are super interested in. Obviously, this isn't for that purpose, but maybe if they're in the comprehensive plan somewhere or not, there'd be some comments that we may make. The last thing is actually very, I guess, tactical because we have an assignment due by the 24th, and it was pretty potentially broad. Like, look for things that are too wordy, redundant, unclear. So we can simply like go into the document and say, unclear. Or we could go in and say, it would be clearer if. So how much detail would you love to see so that you can address and work with it? And like, or I don't like this.
Bad.
Yeah, good, bad. Thumbs up.
I would
Be as lenient as you can for doers on that.
Yeah, no, seriously, teasing aside, I'm taking after Mark here with some, but it would help if we had a little bit of guidance in how we can help, you all with the comments that we're making.
I would say the more detailed, the better. I think it'd be more helpful to know what you found unclear or how we could make it more clear or suggestions you have. So I would encourage you to offer more detail as opposed to yes. That's just kind of my personal
Thumbs up, thumbs up.
feeling.
Okay, we'll try.
One thing to add to that is, if you're reading through a section and you're saying, the city's never going to do this. Why is this in here? Or this is totally out of alignment with what I understand we're trying to achieve as a city. We want to know that. I'd say that is in order of business, that's the number one thing that I'm interested in knowing is when you're reading something, if it seems off or out of place, there's some language from years past, from prior comp plans that's still in there that you'll see. And you'll kind of wonder how it got to say what it says. So remember that our task here is we took an existing plan. It's not a rewrite, it's an update. And there are still some sections left in there that are the result of wordsmithing on the dais at the very end of the process, which represents a compromise. So there's some things in there you'll kind of scratch your head and wonder what they're trying to say. The other thing to keep in mind is that we're not going to solve everything with this update, right? There's things we're going to really try to do here, and so if you see any gaps or anything missing, we want to know that too. But I don't know how much more there is opportunity to add additional content. It's really about the policies that are in there and what we're trying to achieve and whether they're right-sized and need to be fine-tuned. That's, I think, really where we're at. I think what was the the analogy that was used, I heard used is we're about to catch our flight. It's not time to pack your bag.
We'll keep that in mind. Actually, that is helpful. And I guess there's also, like, I think in the financial world, they talk about immaterial, if it's material, and not like super down in the weeds, unless it's unclear, right? So that's super helpful. I'll be able to, start making comments, and I won't just do a thumbs up or thumbs down. So, okay, thank you.
Great. The only other thing I would add to that is just that, there is a lot of content in there to check requirements, so in terms of our response to some of the comments, you may hear from us that, oh, that's in there because it's in, King County's policies and we have to be consistent with it. So we can follow up where those instances occur. But yeah, I think the more detail you can provide, the better we can be in terms of accommodating and making updates in response to that.
I have a couple of questions that are actually similar to what Mike was mentioning there, which is guidance to the commissioners about how to review this. So, for example, you have this language in here that says avoid inclusion of static language, which I'm not sure I understand what that means, but maybe I think, there's some stuff in here about there's policy, but then there's also implementation strategies, and so we have to choose how to spend our time reviewing it. And I'm not sure that I understand what you're looking for kind of under that category. And let me just mention a couple of other things here too, which probably go with this. I think you'll answer it all together. There's the big picture comments like David was suggesting about this is completely counter of what I thought we were trying to do as a city. And then there's this word is spelled wrong and this should be a capital. And I just want to, I'm suggesting providing a little guidance to the commissioners about where to spend their time that would be valuable and useful, and where not to spend their time about colors of graphics, or maybe that is important, right? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think, we've just made significant updates in responding to staff comments. We will have this sent out to our professional copy editor before it gets published. If you see something and you want to call it out, certainly do that, but we're not relying on the commission to be copy editors. Certainly things on like layout and clarity, we would love to hear. We've been spending a lot of effort to improve the clarity, readability, sort of visual communication within the document. But if you have suggestions on that, we'd be more than happy to take them and accommodate it. We want to understand, you guys are very involved, but you're, a little bit less involved in the actual production of it than we are. So you have a little bit of a different perspective, but I think that's kind of what we're looking for. If it reads with clarity, you don't have to have a PhD in planning to understand what we're saying. Things are clear. We'd love to hear input on all of that, and then we can go through and make those updates.
The one other one, which is probably harder to answer, or maybe not even answerable, is it seems to me that in order to achieve what we've been tasked with achieving with our plan, there needs to be some discussion, and there is some discussion about town center and what town center looks like, and it feels like there's some sort of it's tangled together with a lot of the other parts of the comp plan. And I say that because I think town center generates more discussion in the community, whereas a lot of the rest of it doesn't generate a lot of discussion. But I think there's a danger there. I think, and I'm just asking how we should think about this. There's a danger then of getting consumed with comments and reading the parts about town center that, just like this potential, the whole paragraph in the packet about the potential of this piece of property to the west side of town center. And I worry, maybe not worry, but I think it'd be good to provide a little guidance to the commission that is an important piece, but this is an overall strategy for the city, and we need to review all of it and provide input on the new sections and think about how other parts of the community can be affected. But the truth is, town center is the hot topic right now again, and we could easily get consumed with comments on town center. So I want to just see if there's any suggestions about how to think about that when we review this.
Yeah, I think Well, certainly, it goes without saying that we're going to be updating or are in the process of updating the town center plan. So there's going to be opportunities for people to participate and comment on that. And for those reasons, I think, the focus is primarily on the other land use changes that we're making, which, to your example, is adjacent to the town center. But really, any significant changes that happen to the town center would happen as part of the town center process, which is just sort of kicking off. You also brought up something previously I failed to respond to, apologies, but you brought up the issue of implementation and kind of how that's being dealt with. And I alluded to this early in the presentation about, kind of the two avenues you can go to do that. Do you go and put like a lot of information in your plan, a lot of actions and strategies? Or do you kind of do that through separate work programs and functional plans and kind of keep the comp plan as more of a crisp policy document? And I think we've decided to go kind of in the second approach, where we will use department work programs, functional plans, perhaps an annual monitoring report, something that's a little bit more flexible. And I think we'll have more to say on that. That'll be included in terms of the final document. But that is to say that we haven't attempted to kind of put all of the implementation pieces in there, and that's sort of intentional. So again, we're happy to take suggestions on how we can kind of make that bridge to implementation, but we're not, I think, looking for adding a lot of new content on implementation so that the document would become perhaps a little bit unwieldy, and maybe not be aligned with city budgeting process and work programs that really, happen on a biannual basis.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Syed?
Jeff, I have a question about urban design.
Okay.
Is this something that, based on your experience working with the other jurisdictions, is that something that should be included as a part of the as part of master plan, comp plan? Sorry.
Well, different cities approach it differently. Some cities do have an urban design element. Some approach it more by integrating it into the land use element. I certainly think it'll be an important component of the future sub-area plans, and would allow us to address that on a kind of a more focused scale. And certainly it's a huge part of the town center plan, and where we're focusing our efforts there. Additionally, urban design, a little bit of a different type of urban design, will be really critical as we implement HB 1110. And we do have some resources to produce urban design graphics, as we've done for other communities, to really show on, specific example projects in the city how this would play out and really inform a set of development standards that, makes these projects be a success and become an asset and meet community needs as opposed to being viewed unfavorably. So yes, it is, but I would say, there isn't just one approach to doing that. And I think we certainly have opportunities to emphasize urban design through those other, efforts.
David, how are we handling that issue, urban design? Do you have the expertise? Do you have an architect on board when the development comes? Somebody looks at it from an architectural and aesthetics point of view as far as the building goes?
Kelly, you want to talk to that one about that one?
Yeah, actually, that's our town center. Our town center has exterior design standards that are very specific to that sub area. I would say right now our town center is the most urban area of our city. It has its own sub area, its own development standards. All of that was assembled with a consultant team back in 2008-9 when that was adopted. And that consultant team was made up of architects, urban planners, landscape architects, engineers, and so forth. So we do have an example here. And just as Jeff said, different cities handle it different ways. You look at Redmond, who has multiple mixed-use centers within the city. That's just off the top of my head because I have studied that. So for us, this is ours. And, looking at our other sub areas, we may consider different standards for those in the future when we do that planning.
So from the staff point of view, would it make a sense to have your consultant to add a section as far as urban design and provide some guidelines?
I would say not with this comp plan, because that's all handled in the sub-area plan for town center at this time and well covered. And also under review and in the process of being updated with our consultant team today, which is Framework.
Jeff, the mixed-use areas right now, let's look at, for instance, the one that we have, a Safeway Shopping Center, we have residential, some condos, I guess. Do you envision, I think that we just talked about it on a number of occasions, possibility of allowing residential on the top of the existing retail in the mixed-use center?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. As I said earlier, it is allowed right now, but the densities are relatively low for a mixed use area. So we would be looking at, as part of the sub area, the potential for perhaps changing that. But yeah, I think the vision there would likely involve more support for mixed use development, a denser maybe street grid, making it more walkable, things like that, taking on some of the qualities that are planned for the town center, but not, just trying to replicate it per se.
David, what we've learned from the last update, or from last time that we looked at the comp plan as far as projected numbers, dwelling units, jobs, and so forth? When was the last time that we updated the comp plan? 10 years ago?
2015. So yeah, so the numbers are redone completely. They're whole cloth, right? They're not made from the past update. So we have new numbers with this update cycle.
No. I'm trying to find out that, let's say back to 2015, we projected X number of dwelling units will be developed in the next 5-10 years. Have we actually arrived those numbers? Have we been able to meet those demands, not those demands, those projections?
So it was over a 20-year cycle, right? So our growth planning is over 20 years, and I don't know where we stand exactly with the numbers. We had done some calculations in the past, but I just can't recall off the top of my head where we stand with those.
And back to the number of. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to that. With the 2015 plan, half of the density was planned in the town center and the rest in the R zones. And I can't tell you what the exact number, I think it was I'll have to look up in our comp plan. But when we were starting to work on that urban growth capacity study and looking at the number of dwelling units built, we were close. I don't think we exceeded, but we were close. So that the timing for us to start working on this comp plan update was really significant for us. And a lot of that came from the outcome of, the housing industry when that was all impacted in 2009, 2010, 2011. And we were one of the first regions to bounce back quickly. And we saw a lot of units come online very quickly. And I know we've talked about this many a times, but I do know that we were close to that target. I just can't tell you right off the top of the head how close.
And
It is documented in the balanced land use and mobility EIS. That is part of the analysis that was done with that work. So if you find that document, there is a whole section on land use and growth targets and things like that in there.
And what is the status of the site supposed to be our university or college, Central Washington University? Is that something that it's going to be looked at as part of the update in the comp plan?
Not with this cycle. It is identified as a potential part of the Inglewood sub-area, but there's no special attention being given to that site with this comp plan update.
But what is the status of that? Is this something that in the future is going to be a campus?
There is no status. It's just currently, it is what it is today. There is no plan for that property specifically. It is identified as potentially being added as a part of the Inglewood sub-area. At that point in time, there would be a plan developed for the use of that property.
Thanks very much.
Anybody else have anything? All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, David. That's great. Let's move on to our,
We wanted to know if it would be possible to do agenda public comment on this topic to allow the attendees in person here to speak.
absolutely. So let me just suggest, let's do public comment related to this subject. However, if someone wants to make public comment, someone on the meeting wants to make public comment on both of our agenda topics tonight, maybe we should wait for them and we'll do the public comment for that later. Paul? Okay, so let's do public comment related to the topic of the update of the comp plan, and this will be 7 minutes per person. Sorry. So anybody want to make public comment about the update of the comp plan, 7 minutes.
My name is Michael Mattis, and I live at 629 222nd Place Southeast. We're directly across from the Lower Commons, the property that David spoke about earlier. I have some comments to make, but just a little sidebar before I do. The first presenter, Jeff, I don't know his last name, but he talked a lot at the beginning of his presentation about the public outreach in the kind of comp plan ideation phase. However, I can assure you, as evidenced by the attendance here tonight, that those residents directly affected by the proposed land use changes have no idea what's going on. There has been zero direct contact or outreach to us saying, look, there may be some changes that really affect you. You need to get involved. If there had been, we would have engaged much sooner, as has been our practice for all the 18 years we've lived here. Okay, I have to log back into my phone so I can get to my pitch here. Our house lies right across the street from the Commons. The entire boundary of our property to the north and east is adjacent, directly abutting the proposed urban residential upzone. Because our house is situated in the northeast corner of our lot, we're literally steps away to the boundary on really, our lot's kind of pie wedge, so like this. And so on both of those sides, you're saying R12 to R18 potentially. At least that's the proposal now. Yeah, maybe we're 25 feet, something like that, from our front door and our back door to those lots. Little background, again, we moved here 18 years ago. The town center was in the concept phase at the time, and the city was encouraging citizens to engage with the planning process, and we did. We attended countless planning commission meetings. I knew all the commissioners back then, like first name basis. Countless city council meetings, public forums, design charrettes. We gave public comment, both written and verbal, several times. We always tried to be constructive. There were many belligerents at the time over the TC proposal, both those who wanted to maximize their property value and those living near the TC, didn't want anything at all. We were not that. We tried to be constructive. We did not fear the town center. We just wanted it to be done right. Our interest was centered on achieving a positive outcome, an interesting and attractive place to live, shop, and gather, built to scale, mindful of its natural surrounds, and sensitive to the reality of there being bordering SFR neighborhoods. And the city government listened. They listened on every level. The resulting plan reflected this. The wedding cake concept was born out of a conscious effort by city leaders to migrate the intensity of development toward the core while transitioning gradually to the surrounding neighborhoods. Our street is a perfect example of this. The existing homes are all R1. The baseline zoning for the Town Center Brownstones West project right on our block, right across the street. Baseline zoning is R4. Now with TDRs and other incentives, they're building like R8 or R9, something like that. They've maximized it. But still, the baseline was R4. Behind that, somewhat denser. Then you get to the 5, 6, 7-story mixed-use stuff at the core. There was an obvious balancing of priorities in this approach. There was good faith consideration of TC neighbors' desire for a gradual transition. Now we learn that the city proposes to leapfrog right over our homes and erect another cake right in our backyards with allowable building heights of up to 60 feet. From R1 to R12 to R18, zero transition, years of deliberate and exhaustive planning set aside, our house could literally lie in the shadow of whatever gets built there. Little additional context. We raised our kids here, both attended public schools. Catherine runs the local Friends of the Library organization, which since she took over has become something of a juggernaut, raising funds for programming at the library. Countless hours of volunteering that have enriched everyone. She also teaches ESL twice a week through a local church. Her students are recent arrivals to Sammamish from all over the world. Our son became an Eagle Scout here. He led 2 major service projects that benefited the city directly. We have voted in favor of every single school bond and public improvement bond, anything like that. We support it. Quite aside from this, when the city has sought our specific cooperation on neighborhood matters, we've provided it, granting an easement to community-owned land for a roundabout, providing input on the design of the community garden, which the city incorporated in its entirety, and nearly alone among our neighbors, granting the city permission to explore the feasibility of a trail connector from the Lower Commons to Big Rock through yet another parcel of community-owned land. We understand the city's intent is not to harm us personally, that the proposed upzone is a product of bureaucratic map-making, nameless, faceless. Let's just draw a line here. There's homes there, probably people living in those homes, but we have goals to achieve. But please understand, to us, this is punitive. It is devastating. From R1 to R18, zero transition. You've all seen the movie Up. Just keep that image in your mind. We are grieving literally right now. We had planned to age in place. We don't begrudge the effort to create more diverse housing in Sammamish. It is an important goal, one we support, one the town center was meant in large part to address. But city leaders seem now to want to inoculate the rest of Sammamish against just such development by dropping it on our heads. We thought we were doing the right things here. We stayed knowing the town center was coming. We engaged. We were constructive. A balanced plan came out of that process. Catherine, in particular, has made the city a better place. We were invested here. And if this upzone is approved as is, the harm would be real. It would be profound. Our request to the city leaders and planners and commissioners is this. To date, every approved project along the Southeast Fourth Corridor west of 222nd Place, including one under construction now, has been R4 to R6. This is what we always assumed would happen with those properties bordering our own, and we were fine with that. It made sense. R1 directly to R18 does not make sense, and we implore city planners and leaders to account for this, to stair-step any new upzone land use and redevelopment away from surrounding lots, such as ours, and to do so in such a way that future developers cannot later undo by means of variances, incentives, and so forth. We're not asking for preferential treatment. A single homeowner can't do that, I understand that. But we're not asking for gratuitously harmful treatment either. It goes both ways. Jeff spoke of the land use aspect of the comp plan is basically being done. We've gone through that process. I'm sorry. Please don't accept that. Please have consideration and with the knowledge that the surrounding residents, our neighbors, do not know what's going on. We found out second party through a developer. We've been taxpayers here for 18 years. The developer knew before we knew or any of our neighbors knew. It's a fluke that we're even here, that we knew about this at all. Please keep an open mind and know that there's real lives that are being impacted. Thank you.
So let me just say to both of you too, Michael and Catherine, I really appreciate you being here. We very rarely get anybody that comes to our planning commission meetings, as you can see. So I really appreciate you coming and being involved. I would also really encourage you to get a hold of Kelly Hildy and just schedule a time to talk to her if you haven't done that already. She's actually quite nice. And I think, it'd be important for her to hear, some of that directly from you and just have a conversation with her. I found that actually helps quite a bit. And as you just described, happened in the past. So I just encourage, give Kelly a call and set up a time to meet with her. She'd probably be glad to meet with you. But thanks for being here. We're usually just up here by ourselves. Okay, is there anybody else who only wants to talk about the comp plan?
Yep, we have one hand raised, Ms. Towsley. I'll go ahead and promote you to panelist. You can go ahead and unmute and
There we go.
Great.
There we go. I'm trying not to get all the buttons right here. Thank you for letting me comment this evening. My name is Amy Towsley. I'm a municipal manager with Puget Sound Energy, and really looking forward to working with the city of Sammamish along with my colleagues. I know we were engaged in the climate action plan, and of course, as has been discussed this evening, how that bevels into the new climate change and resiliency element. And of course, the update to the utilities element. I think we know there's been a lot of change since the last periodic update. We're looking at more than just that utilities element, and it's not your old utilities element anymore. So we really want to work with the city on continued electrification of the transportation system. There was a reference to electrical vehicles, and certainly building electrification as we see customers make that transformation from natural gas to electricity for heating and cooling and so forth. So I just wanted to chime in this evening, and I've appreciated the discussion the commission has had and the presentations by staff and consultants. So I'll put my contact information in the chat. So, and I look forward to what's going to come and play here with the transportation plan, because we know that's also an element that we're involved with as a franchise utility. How are our facilities impacted in those rights-of-way corridor or ADA transition plans and so forth? So thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy. Nobody else?
No more comments at this time.
Okay. I'd ask if someone could extend the meeting maybe to 9 so that we don't run into that problem.
Proposal to extend to 9.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to extend the meeting to 9. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. Okay, now let's move on to the discussion about the transportation master plan. And I think Audrey's going to give the presentation on this.
I am. Good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you for having us here. So just for the record, Audrey Starcy, Public Works Director. Greg Stamatio is joining me this evening. He's our Deputy Public Works Director. And Lindsay Channing, our Transportation Planner, is joining me. So very excited to share with you what we're working on. This is meant to be a high-level update, and we'll be back in April with details, and then later on this summer with the draft Transportation Master Plan. So bear with me while I share my screen. Losing my voice as well, apparently. Okay, hopefully this is working. Oops. So I did want to cover a few things this evening. So I really wanted to spend some time going over the connection to the comprehensive plan. You've heard from Jeff and David and Kelly this evening, some glimpses into that, but wanted to spend some time talking about that with you this evening, as well as really the significance and importance of a transportation master plan, or TMP, what's included in our 2024 TMP, as well as some next steps coming in throughout 24 and 2025. So first, just kind of wanted to take a minute and really talk about how excited we are for the TMP. This is a great opportunity as we're working on our comprehensive plan update to do things a little bit differently. And as Jeff and David were discussing, the intent with the comprehensive plan is to have our city vision and vision statements and goals and policies lie in that plan. So that will, of course, for transportation occur in the transportation element of that plan. Our transportation master plan, or TMP, will then provide our strategic approach in how we will be implementing those goals and policies in the city's vision, as well as our implementation plan. So we'll include things like our 20-year project list, how we are going to approach multimodal level of service and different things like that. So very excited to have this opportunity. This is something that many of our regional neighbors do. A lot of our jurisdictions in the area have the similar approach. Going forward into later this year, the TMP will be adopted by reference into Volume 2 of the comprehensive plan. So there will no longer be a Volume 2. That will all be rolled into the TMP, and I can get into details as we continue with our presentation tonight. So I did just want to take a few minutes. This is a lot going on this slide, but can kind of talk through a little bit of this. So we did present our draft transit plan to City Council on Tuesday. So if you haven't had an opportunity, we would love to hear from you and from the community on the draft transit plan. That will be coming back to Council on March 19th. So this is kind of the first of many pieces that we're also kind of all also going in parallel tracks this year. Those projects and policies will be added to our TMP. Any near-term projects will be considered for the 2025 through 2030 Transportation Improvement Plan, or TIP, that will be going to Council in May this year and a little bit into June. That TIP will become part of our citywide capital improvement program that Jeff discussed at the beginning of the meeting as well. So more to come on that. Kind of going down my slide, talking about the TMP, like I said, I did reference that will be adopted by reference into the comprehensive plan, into Volume 2. And as we also talked about this evening, Town Center, right? So we're also working on our Town Center plan update, including our Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, or SEIS. That work is going on a parallel track as our comprehensive plan update. And so any potential outcomes, and especially, excuse me, transportation projects or infrastructure requirements, will be folded into a TMP update in 2025. Along with that, we plan to expand some of our multimodal approaches to improving our connectivity within the city, especially as it pertains to pedestrians and bicycle level of service. So we're planning on updating that TMP in 2025. Part of what makes this approach such a great one, it does offer a little bit of flexibility. So in our TMP, any components of the TMP that are related to the Growth Management Act, or GMA, will be updated once a year through our annual docket process. Any other components of our TMP may be updated at any other time, and that will be very clearly spelled out in the executive summary as well as the introduction of our TMP. So that's very clear to the community as well as PSRC and anyone else reading our TMP where those GMA requirements and our compliance with GMA can be found. I know this is a busy slide, so I'll just keep going. Moving forward into 2025, we have some of our functional plans at the top. Again, our TIP and our citywide capital improvement program. In 2025, we'll also be working on our first intelligent transportation system, or ITS strategic plan, and we will begin work on our traffic impact fee update as well. And I know Jeff discussed that it's a way that growth can help to pay for some of the growth, the infrastructure that is needed to accommodate and plan for growth. So more to come on that in 2025. So our transportation master plan will reflect the community input. It advances our city's multimodal transportation vision that was discussed earlier this evening. It implements our goals and policies that you'll be reviewing in our draft of our comprehensive plan update that'll be released later this week. It aligns with other comprehensive plan elements and city plans. The wonderful slide that you saw a little bit ago and how it relates to all the other elements in the comprehensive plan. This is a great example of how that will align with those different elements. And the TMP provides a centralized strategic framework to guide transportation decisions and investments over the next 20 years. Included in the TMP will be a prioritized list of our projects, programs, and strategies to advance the transportation vision as well as comply with the GMA. Kind of spoke to a lot of this already, but we will be including strategies to advance multimodal level of service and provide that framework in our TMP. I talked about already the transit plan and how that will be added to the TMP in terms of guidelines that are discussed in the transit plan for level of service, as well as projects, programs, and other strategies discussed in the transit plan. I've also gone over community input a little bit and Growth Management Act requirements, but that'll all be incorporated into the TMP, as well as components of the 2020 draft TMP that was worked on a few years ago. There's a lot of really wonderful outreach and engagement that was done with the community, and we don't want to lose sight of that. So it'll be added to the TMP as well as other applicable components of it. Of course, we have a new transportation model, travel demand model. So that new model and strategies to accommodate transportation infrastructure for growth will also be included in our TMP. High-level summary of the chapters and just kind of providing a quick framework for you for reference. Again, we'll be back in April with more of the details and later on in Q2 with your draft TMP. And I spoke to the schedule a little bit. As we get closer to some of these dates, especially in the fall, we're working on refining our final dates and when the TMP will go to City Council as well. With that, that concludes our presentation. I'm sure there are questions, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? John, go ahead.
Okay, held back from the last one, but I got stuff for the TMP. So looking back at the 2018 version, well, let's go back to the beginning of time, 1999. The city's vision to create 228 at that time, to give the city some identity, seems like it's put some shackles on us as we go forward. Meaning that you all probably will have some very significant challenges due to the limited resources, physical constraints of how much right-of-way we have, where it is, and dollars. So as you define and develop the new TMP, I'm supposing, hoping, guessing that it's going to be a bit of a departure from the 2018 version. For example, in the 2018 version, it mentions connections and parks in the introduction, but there's absolutely no policy language throughout the document regarding those connections. Based on the outline that you've shown so far, it seems like the multimodal and inter-neighborhood connections, park connections are really important. Just as an illustration of that point, on page 94 of the existing plan, there's a picture of a couple walking. One of them is in the street. And that's my experience on my neighborhood street, that most of our neighbors walk down the middle of the street. So finding innovative solutions that allow our vehicles and those electric bikes that are going about 20 miles an hour to coexist I want to recognize how much work you've got ahead of you, and I'm hoping that you can come up with some great solutions to slow down traffic, allow the fire engines to get there, but connect us between our neighborhoods and parks. And those, I went to the Parks Commission meeting last night, and there was a lot of discussion about trails. But sidewalks and connections are trails too, and probably the biggest recreational activity in the city is just out walking your dog or walking to a park or something like that. So I'm hoping that in your drafts, that there could be some depictions, maps of the multimodal, bike trails, maps and that sort of thing. I hope that's where we're gonna go and end up. So we'll buckle up and see as your drafts come along. Other than that, I don't think I really have any questions.
Who else? Syed.
I have a number of questions. The first question, Audrey, has to do with the relationship between the transportation element, transportation master plan, and a comp plan. The concern that I have is that I'm assuming that all these three projects, they have their own timelines, their own deadline as far as completion of the process. So the question, particularly as far as transportation element of the comp plan, shouldn't we wait till we complete the analysis and come up with a final land use plan? Because land use plan dictates what the transportation needs in the future will be. And the same comment could apply to the transportation master plan. How it's going to work time-wise?
It's a great question. So we are working with Framework and DCD and our whole entire team of consultants using our land use models that we are working on for the comprehensive plan. So all of the analysis that was done to support what traditionally would have been volume 2 of the comprehensive plan, what's volume 2 in our existing comprehensive plan, has all still been done. That will simply be removed, if you will, from volume 2, and we'll have a short executive summary, and then it'll be all of that analysis that was historically in volume 2 will be in the transportation master plan. So it's that analysis, plus we're adding a lot of wonderful things that we don't necessarily have to have in our transportation element, like a 20-year list and some other things too. So it also provides that opportunity for the city to look at improving the plan over time. And it allows that implementation plan to be a little bit more flexible. Like I said, if we're looking at updating elements, or I'm sorry, not elements, but portions of the plan that are not directly GMA requirements, we can update that at any frequency that we would like to. So as things change over time. So hopefully that makes sense, but the volume 2, the transportation master plan is volume 2, if that to say.
So I'm just saying that are we putting the cart before the horses? Because, for instance, you mentioned about modeling. you do the modeling based on some assumptions, some really clear assumptions on the land use side. We are, as you heard, we're still discussing what the final land use is going to be and the density and all that. These are the ingredients that you need to put the model together and come up with the outcome of it. And the outcome it will be used to develop your transportation element or the transportation master plan. So I'm concerned about the timing of it, that's all. Because David has a deadline by December that the comp plan has to be done. So within that time frame, are you going to be able to time it in a way that you would benefit from the final plan as far as the land use and use that information as a basis to develop the modeling analysis and develop the comp plan, develop the transportation element?
Yes, all of that work is actually being done right now. So we have been working on that already, right? So as we have gotten our transportation zones and the different land use and growth numbers, that has been some of the foundational pieces for our updated model. So we have been doing that as we have been getting all of these numbers and coming out of really important discussions with Planning Commission and Council. So that'll all be done in lockstep so that at the end of the year, we will have both an updated comprehensive plan as well as an updated TMP.
Also,
our very first TMP.
Also, I was surprised. I was at the council, and you had a really very good presentation as far as the transit plan. Really, I enjoyed seeing what it's all about. But was there any reason that you did not see any need to share that information with us and share it with the Planning Commission before finalizing it? I'm talking about the transit plan.
The transit plan is actually still, the final plan is on our website, but we are accepting and would love any feedback and comments both from Planning Commission and the community. So that's going back to council on March 19th.
For the adoption?
Yes, so it has not been adopted yet, so we would love any feedback.
You mentioned about the model analysis. I'm assuming that you're talking about the using that as a basis to develop the traffic impact fees and also forecasting future trip generations and so forth?
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
Anybody else? I have one suggestion and one question. My suggestion is I was in the midst of and involved in some of the discussions that happened in the city between, let's say, 2017 and 2020 about transportation, and recall, the nature of all that. I would really encourage that you make sure, because I'm not picking sides, I'm just saying that there was some unproductive time that went into transportation discussion at that time. I'd really encourage that anybody that works on this be familiarized with that history so we can avoid using words or taking an approach or whatever that will dredge up the ghost of transportation plans in the past, right? And let's just not repeat the mistakes that we made in that time period, especially for folks who weren't involved at that time, right? It'd be easy to miss some of what happened. I think anybody that was involved will remember. So that's a suggestion. The question I had is, as you develop this, the Transportation Master Plan, do you have discussions with the Sammamish Police Department? I mean, they're out in the midst of this all the time. It seems like they would be a good input source, and I was just curious if that was part of the effort.
Yes, Public Works works with the police department frequently. So I actually had a meeting with the chief this morning. So we are often working together on a variety of different things, typically remodeling traffic and potential road closures, but we work together often and would love their input as well.
I hope when you had a meeting with the chief, it was congenial in a conference room.
Yes, of course. we coordinate with them all the time. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's all I had. Anybody else? Great. Thanks for introducing us to this, and we'll look forward to hearing more and seeing the details and reviewing the plan in the future.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. We're really excited, and this is a big milestone for the city, so very excited about it.
And a super important thing too. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and now do public comment for anybody that wants to comment on both the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan topic. So do we have anybody that would like to comment on both?
Yep, we have one hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'll go ahead and promote you to panelist.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Excellent meeting, lots of ground covered. And I particularly enjoyed the public comment midstream. I too was involved in the entire town center plan from another perspective, but also semi-involved in the city since it incorporated, have quite a lot of history. But what the speakers spoke to was very accurate, in my opinion, to the level of public engagement and all some of it contentious, some not, lots of views presented that created the town center plan. So I just wanted to say I agree with a lot of their comments. I could spend hours on this, but I'm going to talk about two things off the bat and then get into some specifics on your meeting. Anybody who wants to sit down and discuss how determining internal housing needs are like doing appraisal of houses. Houses are a range of value. They're based on common factors when you have them appraised, but the individual assumptions that go in by each appraiser can generate a tremendous range of opinion on the same factors. So what I've been working on, and I haven't been as clear on this as I should have been earlier, I've been bringing many of the factors to the table clearly, but the opinion on what each of those means is a legislative consensus, and that's what we need to work on from an internal point of view that hasn't happened in our community. And in my earlier comment today, the needs for some price ranges of market rate housing from 500 to $1.2 million, a few higher end units of different types of housing than single family, and for affordable housing can get quantified within a range based on the factors. I'd love to talk more about that with all of you. I do have some information, and I agree with the comments that Director David Pyle talked about on the standards in growth targets are all over the board. So I'm not reaching conclusions with any of these facts, but I'm going to share some things that I've compiled over time that I was putting together while you were talking that I think will be helpful. The first growth target in Sammamish was for the time from August of 1999 through September 2003, when the first comp plan was adopted. And that growth target, interestingly enough, was a range from King County. It was for 4,916 up to 6,012, and that was before we annexed Klahani. The first comprehensive plan, which I don't have this top of mind, but I went into my stuff while we were talking, and I found this. The first comprehensive plan was adopted in September of 2003, and it was ordinance number 2003-130 that lives on the city's webpage. If any of you are interested in looking at that, it's no light read. It's about 400 and something pages, and I did a Adobe word counter, which I'm not saying is accurate, but it says it's 147,000 words. I've read it over time. I understand it. In 2015, when the second comprehensive plan was adopted, the first comprehensive plan was repealed in its entirety, and the second comprehensive plan replaced it. And Mr. Pyle was correct. There was a lot of wordsmithing at the end. As one council member back then said, they felt that we were throwing the baby out with the bathwater and wanted to add a bunch back. Now I've got some more numbers. The growth target in our first comprehensive plan adopted in 2003 was 3,842. The growth target adopted in our 2015 comprehensive plan, including the anticipation of the Klahani annexation, was 4,849. Now, I have a strong opinion on how growth targets should be looked at, because they start early so jurisdictions can plan. I have a simple answer. The average of the growth target over a 20-year period for the number of years that plan was in effect is what the target is applied. So the new 2,100 growth target, in my opinion, doesn't start until we adopt that plan. We're still under parts of our current plan until the 2024 plan becomes adopted. Now, based on population in the city and town cohort, which Sammamish is in, what was our share of that population growth target? It translated to roughly 6,200 housing units. And the councils at the time began with a growth target of 0, then they went to 700, then they went to 2,100. And my beef with that whole process was I didn't argue to keep it low from an external point of view. I argued that quantified internal numbers, which I admit cannot be 100%, but you can think about them like horseshoes. You can get close. So if you understand the factors, give all the factors to those that want to take the time to study what those factors mean, they're going to come up with what the numbers they think are right. And that's what I have done, and that's what I encourage other people to do. I have numbers of how many homes have been built every year. Somebody wants to call me and talk about that. That was mentioned tonight. I have all those numbers, and I'm happy to go over a litany of factors, roughly 10 or 12, that were clearly analyzed in 2015 based on 2010 data, and then another 6 or 7 that are extraordinary that were done in 2023 to set the range that I believe internal needs are. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Thanks, Paul. And I don't think we have anybody else.
No more hands.
All right. Any final thoughts, Evan or David, from staff for this evening? No?
No,
All right.
nothing profound.
As always, I'd encourage everybody to pay attention to the calendar. I was sitting here thinking of an analogy. I think this meeting represents us turning and starting to wade into the deep end of the pool. So we've got a lot coming up in the near future here. So please make sure you let Evan and me know if you're not going to be able to attend a meeting, and let's all try to keep up. All right. Would someone like to move to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.